The Bhangar fort stood like a decaying skeleton under the pale moonlight, its jagged walls casting long, twisted shadows across the barren landscape. The locals had warned him. They had pleaded with him not to stay past sunset, but Arav, a historian with a reputation for debunking myths, had laughed it off. Ghosts don't exist, he had said. Only the stories we tell to scare ourselves. Now, as the last rays of sunlight vanished, Arav regretted his arrogance. The air inside the fort was thick and heavy, as if the walls themselves were breathing. The silence was unnatural. No crickets, no wind, just an oppressive stillness that made his skin crawl. He set up his equipment in the central courtyard, determined to document the fort's architecture. But as he adjusted his camera, he noticed something strange. The lens kept fogging up, as though something cold was breathing on it. Then came the whispers. At first they were faint, like the rustling of leaves. Soon they grew louder, more distinct. They were voices, hundreds of them, speaking in a language Arav couldn't understand. The words slithered into his ears, making his head pound. He tried to ignore them, but the voices grew more insistent, more angry. "Leave," they hissed. "Leave now, or join us." But before he could react, the temperature plummeted. His breath turned to ice in the air, and then he saw her. A woman in a blood-red sari, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes black voids that seemed to suck the light from the air. She floated inches above the ground, her feet twisted and broken, her arms outstretched like a predator ready to strike. Her mouth opened, revealing rows of jagged, broken teeth. She let out a scream that shattered the silence. Arav stumbled backward, his heart pounding in his chest. He turned to run, but the fort's gates slammed shut. With a thunderous crash, the walls seemed to close in around him, the stones groaning as if alive. The woman's laughter echoed through the courtyard, high-pitched and manic. "You shouldn't have stayed," she hissed, her voice dripping with malice. "Now you'll join the feast." From the shadows, more figures emerged, skeletal, rotting, their eyes glowing with a sickly green light. They surrounded Arav, their bony fingers reaching for him. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. The woman in red floated closer, her twisted grin widening. "Welcome to Bhangar," she whispered. The last thing Arav saw was her skeletal hand plunging into his chest, tearing out his still-beating heart. The ghosts descended on him like vultures, feasting on his flesh as his screams echoed through the night. The next morning, the locals found Arav's camera and notebook in the courtyard, but the notebook contained a single, hastily scrawled entry. "The curse is real. They're here. They're hungry. God help me." The page was stained with blood. To this day, no one dares enter Bhangar Fort after dark, but if you listen closely on a moonless night, you might hear Arav's screams, mingling with the laughter of the boot that haunts the ruins. If you're foolish enough to stay, you might just become part of the feast.